He held the wrapping paper in one hand, her favorite deep green with gold specks, and looked down at the tree like he was checking for something that had been stolen. The lights blinked twice. Then he slid the gift, her gift, out from under the branches without a word. I said it again, trying to sound gentle this time. It's just, for closure, it's not romantic. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just stood there in that dark gray sweater she loved on him and nodded once, slowly, like someone closing the lid on something they'd taken care of for too long. Then he packed. No raised voice, no guilt trip, not even a question. Just took the vintage record player, the one he'd spent weeks hunting down, and slid it back into its shipping box. The tissue paper was still intact. A suitcase appeared by the door. He left his key on the counter beside the cinnamon-scented candle I'd bought last fall. And when I turned around again, he was gone. If this story pulls you in, take 2 seconds to like the video and subscribe. 97% of listeners never do, and it helps our team keep telling these stories. Thank you. I thought he might message from the train. He didn't. I thought maybe he'd be waiting for me to call, to explain more, to walk it back. But the phone stayed still. The notifications didn't come. I walked the apartment alone that night, hands twitching toward my phone, then back to my sides. I played a podcast, turned it off, made tea I didn't drink. I told myself it wasn't a breakup. It was space, temporary, but even as I told myself that, I could feel the room shifting. The quiet didn't feel waiting anymore. It felt hollow. The next morning I opened the closet and his shoes weren't there, not shoved in a corner, not hidden behind mine, gone. His coat wasn't on the hook. I opened the drawer where he used to keep extra chargers and earbuds and small receipts folded in half. Empty, no note, no line left behind, like in the movies. It was as if he had folded himself out of my life so neatly it hurt more than if he'd screamed. I checked my banking app around lunch, half out of habit. Card declined. I tried again, then another. The rent draft bounced. I called the number for the property manager. Your payment didn't go through. Is there another account you'd like to use? I felt heat rush to my ears. I told her I'd get back to her. I sat on the kitchen floor and stared at my hands. I hadn't cheated. I told myself that again and again, but he hadn't waited for the wound to fully bleed before walking out the door either. Was that closure or just strategy? By the time my ex texted that he was flying in, I wasn't sure what I even wanted anymore. Maybe just to prove to myself that this wasn't all a mistake, that I hadn't picked wrong twice, that I could end something clean, dignified, like an adult, but I should have known better. Because 3 days later, he showed up, and he wasn't alone. His new girlfriend, heavily pregnant, stepped into my living room like she owned it. And 6 hours after that, her water broke, right there on my white rug. The key clicked softly as it touched the granite, the only sound in the apartment besides the soft wheeze of the radiator. I didn't leave a note, no final text, no passive-aggressive quote about closure or timing, just the key, the card, and silence. I turned off my phone, not just muted, off. I didn't want it buzzing in my coat, begging me to check. I didn't want to see her name lighting up the screen with a carefully worded follow-up, something vague and soft that would pretend to be kindness, but wouldn't undo what she said. Instead, I got on a train heading east. I bought a one-way ticket in cash, asked for no receipt, and sat near the back, where the lights flickered a little too much. I stared out the window and didn't think about her tree, or the blinking lights, or how she used to hum to herself while rearranging ornaments. I thought about nothing. Just the sound of the tracks and the weight in my chest. The motel I found wasn't even listed online. It sat 2 blocks behind an old industrial park, the kind of place where no one asked questions if you paid on time. The guy at the front desk slid the key across the counter and didn't look up from his crossword. Room 12. The door stuck. The bed creaked. The TV didn't work unless you hit the side. It was perfect. I made a list in my head that first night. No distractions, no dramatics, no explaining myself. She had said what she needed. I was giving it to her. Full measure. Not the half-clinging kind where you hover just in case she changes her mind. Not the hopeful type where you wait for her to realize she made a mistake. No, she wanted space, distance, room to breathe. She got it. I cut the auto pays, froze the joint accounts, and rerouted my mail to a UPS drop. Everything clean, legal, immediate. The accounts were in my name, always had been. She just didn't think I'd ever close them. She must have assumed I'd wait, flinch, reach back. I didn't. I started waking up before dawn. walked to the warehouse 2 lots down, and watched the crew load trucks. No one noticed me at first. I was just a shadow near the vending machines. But I watched, learned who showed up late, who double-checked manifests, who cut corners. Quiet observation. It gave me something to anchor to. She didn't text. Not at first. Maybe she thought I'd cave. Or maybe she was too wrapped up in her past, walking through her door with new baggage. But I wasn't retreating. I wasn't hiding. I was subtracting myself. I wasn't the loud kind of gone. I was the kind you only notice once it's far, far too late. It started with a declined charge at the cafe down the block. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet blink of the card reader, and the barista's polite, slightly strained smile. Maybe try it again? I did. Twice. Same result. I tapped another card, one she never knew I had, and left quickly with the paper cup burning my fingers. I told myself it was a glitch, holiday processing delay, something normal. But later that afternoon, the grocery app locked me out and wouldn't let me check out. Then the rent alert came in. Unable to process your payment. I clicked into the joint account. Empty, not frozen, closed. The screen was white with a single message. This account is no longer active. I tried the savings next, same result. No fanfare, no warning, just gone. I sat down on the arm of the couch and stared at the TV, not even turning it on. My mind started circling. I hadn't cheated on him. I kept repeating that like it was a prayer. I just asked for time, for space. I didn't expect him to vanish so cleanly, to unplug without noise. That wasn't how these things usually went. He was supposed to fight a little, text something bitter, knock once and leave again, something. But he didn't leave scraps. He left a vacuum. I walked the apartment in socks, looking for a note I knew didn't exist. I opened the drawer where he kept cables and keys. Empty. His side of the closet. Cleared. Even the toothbrush was gone. He hadn't slammed the door. He'd erased the trail. The next morning the buzzer went off. I wasn't expecting anyone. I assumed it was a delivery. I pressed the intercom and didn't ask who it was. That was my second mistake, because when I opened the door, it was him, David. The ex, the reason I'd asked for space in the first place. He smiled like it was still 2017. Hey, he said, casual, like we'd texted just yesterday. But his hand wasn't empty. He was holding a small duffel bag, and behind him, climbing the stairs slowly, was a woman I didn't recognize. She was heavily pregnant, and very clearly not amused. This is Kayla, he said too quickly. She's due soon, but don't worry, we won't be in the way. He didn't wait for me to speak, just brushed past me like he used to, straight into the apartment like it was his. The woman followed, wincing as she sat down. She gave me a tight smile, the kind that begged not to be judged too quickly. I stood in the doorway, stunned, hearing the kettle start to whistle. I hadn't turned it on. They were moving in, or staying, or crashing. I didn't know. But I knew the furniture was mine. The apartment, mine. The accounts, no longer safe. Nothing was stable. I texted him, Alex, for the first time in 4 days. Please call me. No reply. So I called, straight to voicemail, not blocked, not ignored, just unreachable, deliberately, strategically. And for the first time since I asked him to stay away, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel. Panic. I didn't sleep the night before. Not really. Just drifted in and out, the way you do when something might go very wrong and you can feel it humming under the floorboards. Around 4:30, I heard a soft thud in the hallway and someone opening the fridge. Not my fridge, not anymore. I stayed in the guest room, or what used to be my office, pretending not to hear Kayla breathing heavily on the couch, her swollen stomach rising and falling in jerky waves. David hadn't left. That was the part that made it real. He'd promised he just needed to drop her off for a few hours until her sister came. But no sister ever arrived. And now he was walking around barefoot, drinking my oat milk, adjusting the thermostat like this was some Airbnb he had reserved. The contractions started just before sunrise. Quiet at first, then louder. By the time she doubled over and gripped the edge of my counter with both hands, I was already calling the hospital. David was useless, pacing, muttering, telling her to breathe through it, like he was reading a script he never studied. I handed her my phone and jacket and watched them disappear into the rideshare car while I stood barefoot on the front step, the December air cutting through my sweater. The neighbor across the hall saw it all. I could tell. Her curtain twitched. I waited 2 hours before dialing his number. Alex's, my ex, the one I told to stay away for closure's sake. He picked up. No greeting, just silence. Like he was already expecting me to say something I'd regret. I did my best to keep my voice steady. Failed. He came, but not alone. Kayla, his girlfriend or whatever she is, she went into labor. In my living room. On my rug. There was blood. She screamed. I didn't know what to do. He just walked around like he lived here. Silence, not cold, not angry, just the sound of breath and space and a man who'd removed himself so completely I couldn't even hear him judging me. I didn't ask for this, I added quietly, even though I knew that wasn't the part he cared about. He still didn't speak. I didn't know she'd be here. I didn't know she was that far along. Nothing. I waited a few more seconds, thinking maybe he was just waiting for the right words, or maybe for me to ask for something, help, advice, and out, but I couldn't because I knew what I'd done, what I'd asked for, and now I was living with the consequences, literally. When he ended the call, there was no click, just the line going dead. I stared at my phone screen until it went dark again, then set it down face first on the counter. The same counter where I'd once left his favorite breakfast, black coffee, no sugar, no cream. The same counter where he'd placed his key. I realized then what that call had been. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a test, and he passed it by doing exactly what I told him to. Nothing. He vanished from my life like a curtain being pulled closed, not ripped, not slammed shut, just a soft slide into a silence I didn't know how to fill. But somewhere, he was building something. I just didn't know what yet. The truth is, I never knew what he was capable of when no one was watching. After he left, after I stopped calling, after the panic drained into a kind of numb ache, I went quiet. And so did the world. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, not my friends, not my mom. I pretended things were just complicated, that we were taking space. I even joked about holiday drama to coworkers who barely looked up from their screens. No one pressed, no one asked about the man who used to drop me off at work. He had always been quiet, steady, a shadow you only noticed when the sun moved. What I didn't know was that while I was trying to patch the bleeding edges of my December, he was folding himself into something new. He took a job in a warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place where the paint peeled off metal doors and the time clock was older than most of the crew. Graveyard shift, manual loading. He didn't tell anyone his last name, didn't offer a resume, just showed up, hands steady, eyes sharp, willing to take direction and watch. Really watch. At first, they treated him like a placeholder, temporary, someone between jobs. But he didn't complain. He took notes, mentally, tracked inefficiencies, noticed who skipped steps, who double-scanned, which managers fudged logs when corporate checked in. 6 months in, they gave him a clipboard and keys to the side gate, said he was reliable, said he should supervise a crew. He still didn't use his real name. On paper, he was Alex Rudenko. Clean slate, no links, no history, a man who didn't owe anyone a single explanation. By the time I tried his number again, he was already running shifts like a conductor. Quiet hand gestures, sharp routines. He'd mapped out new load routes, reorganized storage units, cut their processing time by a third. When the owner's son tried to upgrade their software and everything stalled for a week, Alex stepped in and rebuilt the system on spreadsheets and muscle. It ran better than the software ever had. By year 2, he'd eliminated overtime waste and negotiated vendor schedules. By year 3, they asked him to sit in on ownership meetings, not as staff, as an advisor, and he said yes, not because he wanted recognition, but because he was finally in a room where no one underestimated him. I didn't know any of this when I stared out my kitchen window that spring and wondered where he'd gone. I just knew the wind had shifted, and somewhere out there, the man I'd asked to step aside was standing taller than he ever had with me. The message came during a staff meeting, just a random link, no context, sent from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored it. We were deep into a budget discussion, and I was already tired of pretending I was still interested in quarter-end burn rates. But something about the timing, early morning, no intro, made me tap it open anyway. The video buffered, then played, a conference room, neutral backdrop, corporate banner tucked behind a podium, a man sat in a dark blazer, hands folded calmly in front of him, a name tag on the lower third, Alex Rudenko, Regional Logistics Leader of the Year. I smiled, faintly amused. Logistics? It wasn't a field I knew much about, but the title sounded inflated, like one of those internal awards companies give themselves to feel important. I almost clicked out of it. But then he spoke, and everything stopped. His voice, calm, steady, unmistakable. I leaned forward, hit pause, rewound, watched the opening again. It was him, hair a little shorter, shoulders broader, eyes sharper, but him, Alex. I froze the frame and stared at it. My mind rejected it at first, like seeing a stranger wear your father's watch. I grabbed a pen off the desk without thinking and clicked it again, trying to process. He wasn't using his full name. Of course not. Rudenko was his mother's name. He'd mentioned that once offhandedly while pulling a jacket off a hook. Said he never used it for anything official. Until now. I watched the video all the way through this time, no skipping. It just sat there in that gray office chair, blinking against fluorescent lights, while the man I thought I knew answered questions about optimizing back-end operations, inventory systems, contractor coordination. He spoke with a kind of quiet certainty I'd never seen in him before, not because he hadn't had it, but because I never really looked. The interviewer smiled too much, nodded eagerly, but Alex barely reacted, just shared numbers, timelines, improvements, projections, clear, efficient, unsentimental. I replayed one segment 3 times. The way he described turning a failed shipping contract into a surplus route made the woman next to him raise her eyebrows and mouth, "Damn," off camera. That used to be me. I thought I'd walked away from someone who didn't push back, someone passive, maybe a little too simple. I thought he'd fade out, move on quietly, maybe date someone safer, someone who didn't ask for space or use words like closure. Instead, he'd stepped out of the frame I left him in, and into one I wasn't invited to. I opened another tab and searched his name. Not much came up, just a handful of corporate mentions, a LinkedIn profile with minimal info, and a blurry group photo from the firm's anniversary dinner. But even in the blur, I spotted him in the center, clean lines, quiet confidence. For the first time since that Christmas, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, not regret, not guilt, fear, because I realized the thing I'd tried to box and label, to control, had kept growing without me, and now I didn't even know where the edges were. I booked the flight on impulse, barely packed, just to carry on with 2 blouses, a blazer that didn't quite fit the way it used to, and a pair of heels I hadn't worn in over a year. I told myself it wasn't desperation, just curiosity, just closure, real closure this time, the kind you ask for in person. The kind where you see their face and say the things you rehearsed in every shower, every night alone. The car ride from the airport was quiet. I'd memorized the address from the video credits, just a modest business park on the edge of town. Gray building, tinted glass, understated signage. I expected something bigger or colder, but it looked normal. Like any logistics company that quietly kept the world turning while the rest of us weren't paying attention. Inside, it smelled like fresh coffee and paper. The receptionist glanced up from her screen, mid-20s, polished, polite, but not overly warm. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here to see Alex Rudenko." She paused, not confused, just measuring me. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, trying not to fidget. "But he'll want to see me. I'll let him know you stopped by." She interrupted gently. It was practiced, not dismissive, not cold, just final. "I can wait," I offered. She smiled again, the same kind of smile you give to someone who doesn't realize the party's already over. Then she picked up the phone and spoke too quietly for me to hear. I stood there, holding the strap of my purse with both hands, suddenly aware of how loud my heels sounded in the lobby, of how overdressed I was, of the smudge on my phone screen and the chipped corner of my nail polish. A man in a black suit with a security badge approached. "Ma'am," he said, with the practiced cadence of someone who's done this before, "I'm going to have to escort you out now." I blinked. "He's not going to come down?" The man didn't answer, just waited. "Can you at least tell him—" "No messages," he said gently. I didn't argue. There was no scene to make, no leverage to twist. The receptionist didn't look up again. The lobby door clicked behind me like punctuation. Outside, the wind picked up, catching the edge of my blazer and tugging it sideways. I stood there on the sidewalk watching the glass doors reflect a version of myself I didn't recognize. Someone shut out, someone irrelevant. I'd flown in with words ready, apologies maybe just honesty. But I never even got to say his name out loud, because he didn't need closure. He already had something better, distance and control, and I had neither. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, thick cardstock, hand address, no return name, just a logo embossed in deep silver ink. I ran my thumb along the edge, hesitated, then slid my nail under the flap and opened it. The invitation inside was layered and elegant, like a wedding or some high-end charity gala. Black tie, seated dinner, company anniversary celebration, location, the Glass House downtown, Saturday at 7, and there it was, his name. Guest of honor, Alex Rudenko, Regional Logistics Leader of the Year. For a second, the room tilted, just a little, like the air had shifted. I read the invitation twice before I saw the folded slip tucked beneath it. Cream paper, black ink, his handwriting, unmistakable. You once said I was background noise. Come see what happens when the room changes. No greeting, no signature, just that. I sat down at the edge of my bed and stared at the message. I didn't remember saying those exact words, but I didn't need to. I knew what I'd made him feel. I'd minimized him, turned him into a placeholder. The one who was always there, always supportive, always easy to silence when something more important came along. And now, the room was his, not just the building. The attention, the narrative, I could see it already. Waitstaff moving between candlelit tables, the hum of conversation, eyes turning when he entered, people laughing a beat too loud at something he said, people clapping when his name was announced, people looking at me if they even recognized me as something that didn't quite belong, and yet I couldn't throw the invitation away. I left it on the table for hours, folded, unfolded, tucked it back into the envelope, and then took it out again. My phone buzzed twice, friends, weekend plans, but I didn't respond. I couldn't explain what this was. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't a warning. It was a mirror held up with perfect stillness. I went online, searched the venue. It was one of those all-glass buildings near the Arts District, usually booked out for 6 months. Spotlights, city views, a rooftop terrace with heaters glowing like embers. Every picture looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. And now it belonged to him. My finger hovered over the RSVP button. I told myself it was just curiosity, that maybe I'd walk in, say hello, make peace, maybe even joke about it. But part of me knew better. It wasn't about peace. It was about witnessing what I'd underestimated and facing the version of him that no longer had to explain anything to me. I walked in 3 minutes late on purpose, just long enough to make an entrance without seeming calculated. The room glittered, everything glass and gold and backlit elegance. The kind of event you only get invited to if your name means something now. My heels echoed on the stone floor, but the conversations didn't stop. That was the first crack in my borrowed confidence. I spotted him instantly. Near the stage, surrounded by people I didn't know. Men in pressed suits, women with sleek hair and practiced laughs. They looked at him like he wasn't just important, but central. He stood still, one hand in his pocket, laughing at something someone said. It wasn't the laugh I remembered. This one was quieter, contained, like he only gave out what he chose to. I made my way across the room, drink untouched in my hand. Every step felt heavier than the last. I could feel my smile faltering. My dress suddenly too tight at the shoulders. I smoothed it down out of habit, then stopped when I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. For a second, I didn't recognize myself. Just someone trying too hard to look like she belonged. When I reached him, he didn't look up. Not right away. He was finishing a conversation, nodding once, accepting a pat on the back, before finally turning toward me, and when he did, his eyes moved right past mine to the space behind me, then back to his glass. Why invite me? I asked, forcing the words out. My voice didn't tremble, but it didn't land the way I wanted either. He looked at me then. Not cruel, not cold, just done. So you'd understand, he said simply. I didn't disappear. I grew without you. That line hit harder than anything else could have, not because it was sharp, but because it was true. Around us, the conversations continued. Waiters passed. Laughter rose from a corner table. I wasn't part of it. I wasn't seen, not as anything but a shadow of someone they'd never met. Someone touched his arm, a woman in navy, younger, self-assured. They're starting the slideshow, she said with a smile. He nodded, excused himself with a glance past me, and stepped away. Just like that. I stood alone in the center of that glowing, curated room, holding a drink I didn't want, wearing a dress I couldn't afford, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. My mouth went dry. My hands started to shake. I backed up a step, then another, until I found the nearest column and leaned against it like it was the only solid thing left in the room. A man nearby asked his date who I was. She shrugged. No idea, she said. And that was the moment it landed. I hadn't just lost him. I'd erased myself from the version of the world where he mattered. And now that world didn't need me anymore. She waited near the hallway leading to the terrace, standing too straight, like her spine was bracing for whatever came next. I'd almost forgotten she was still in the room. The program had moved on. Announcements, applause, the CEO's tired joke about trucks and time zones, but she stayed back, quiet, half folded into herself, clutching her clutch like it might anchor her to something. I came off the stage after the final toast, nodding to a few colleagues, thanking the event manager. A reporter I didn't recognize approached with a copy of the logistics journal in hand, the same one with the profile she'd watched weeks ago. I took the offered pen and flipped to the feature spread. My photo, sharp and distant, the quote underlined in red, "He vanished once," returned untouchable. I didn't ask who brought the magazine. I didn't look to see if she had followed the reporter. But when I turned to hand it back, she was the one standing there, closer than before, hands out, eyes wide, and silent. I placed the signed page into her waiting hands, not unkindly, but not gently either. No eye contact, no invitation, just boom, final. She opened her mouth like she might say something, a sentence, a memory, a defense, but nothing came out. Her fingers gripped the edge of the page, knuckles white. I stepped past her, didn't stop, didn't turn. A few feet behind me, a chair scraped the marble floor. She sat. I didn't see it. I only heard the sound. A pause, then nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no voice calling out. The room swirled around her. Servers clearing plates, guests gathering coats, music swelling slightly louder to signal the end. But she didn't move again. She sat there gripping that one page, that one sentence, eyes fixed on something no longer hers, breath held like maybe, just maybe, stillness could rewind time, but it didn't, and I never looked back.